remember years ago, and it isn't that long ago, possibly 20 years ago, when women had breast cancer. In order to control it, usually they would remove the ovaries or do a oophorectomy, or do pituitary gland excision. And it never did control the problem anyway. Now, in more recent years, what they've been doing is using hormone inhibitors, you know, the tamoxifen and things of that kind. But these aren't permanent solutions either. Now, don't you think that by balancing the hormones, they'd get better results?
Right. The problem is that by the time the cancer is findable, shows up, some by palpation or by mammogram, it may have taken 10 or 12 years for that cancer to develop. And people should know that cancer cells are not like infections. They're not foreign invaders. They're normal cells that have undergone a very minor change in the DNA, the chromosomes, and they begin to grow at a different rate. Breast cancer cells, for instance, they grow at a faster rate. The proliferation rate is a little bit faster, doesn't have to be much, and they also don't mature to become what the real cell was supposed to be. So
that's why they call them embryonic cells.
Yes, well, lack of differentiation and increased proliferation, and it becomes a cancer cell. And by the time it's found, it's only a reflection of something that has happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
And 20 years.
I think the big change that's happening is more and more people are beginning to understand that the cancer, the tumor itself, is not the disease.
Not at all.
Not the disease.
That's
it's a sign of the disease. Underlying that is some systemic change, that something is out of balance. And if we can find that. And I think in the past, when the business of removing an ovary for treating breast cancer is now 100 years old. There's an article recently in Lancet commemorating the 100th birthday of the first ovary removal for treating breast cancer. It doesn't work very well.
No, that's why they stopped doing it, actually.
It was
a surgical procedure.
But it was an idea. There was something underneath that was doing it, and I like that. But what they're missing is the delicate balance of hormones that comes. So we know that diet has a lot to do with it. We know that stress has a lot to do with it. We know that these synthetic petrochemicals have hormonal effects that throw off our balance, and they also throw us off by being exposed in embryo times, that when we grow up, then the ovary can't do what it's supposed to do, and so the balance is off. So I like the idea that people are beginning to understand. One of the basic things, I think, is the estrogen and progesterone balance.
Yes.
And if estrogen is going to be high and progesterone falls, I think that puts you at a great risk. Probably 85–90% of the breast cancers that develop are probably related somehow to that risk.
Yeah. The key word is balance.
But you know, the typical doctor doesn't even measure progesterone levels.
No. Well, this is why they're using the hormone inhibitors. They're not thinking in terms of hormonal balance.
The hormonal inhibitors, like Lupron, they eliminate all the hormones.
Quite well for many years. Cancer patients.
Yes. Yeah,
surprisingly well compared to other statistics. Am I right?
That is right. In 1978, when I started, we're talking now almost 20 years ago.
That's right.
19 years ago. In my innocence, I chose people who couldn't take the regular hormones, estrogen.
Yes.
See, I still believe that what I thought had been taught that we should give estrogen was right, but these people couldn't take estrogen because the history of breast cancer and cancer was contraindicated. So I chose progesterone just to see, knowing it was safe, and wondering what was happening. Well, I've known these women now for 18, 19 years. None of them have had a recurrence. None of them has had a second cancer develop. None have had a metastases. It's amazing. Then I added the progesterone to those who were already on estrogen, and I had to reduce their estrogen, otherwise they had estrogen side effects. Now, none of those patients have had cancer. And I was thinking over the other day. If by the time a woman is 80, 84 years old, her chance of having breast cancer is something like 1 out of 10, 1 out of 12, even 1 out of 8. And here I have hundreds of patients over the years. None of them have had breast cancer.
Just by balancing the hormones. Now,
I did more than that. I talked to them about diet, too.
Of course.
And tried to deal with...
said that.
Well, it's true.
I know. I think it's important to tell the listeners, too, that when you say natural progesterone, it isn't something necessarily that comes from a pharmaceutical supply.
No.
It's coming from food, isn't it? Or a natural, a botanical of something.
Right. Well, here's my take on that. I think that we've evolved, or at least we've lived in concert with, plant sources of food for the last 6-8 million years. And plants do make compounds which have hormone-like effects. We call them phytohormones, phytoestrogens, and I'm sure there are phytoprogesterone-like compounds. And I think this goes a long way towards balancing. And I think other cultures that stick to a diet of these very nutritious plant-based foods aren't going to have these problems. In fact, we know they don't. We know that women growing up in the third world don't. Some of them don't even have a word for hot flashes in their language. Can you imagine?
Because they don't have them.
They don't have them. And they don't have the breast cancer and the cancer of the uterus. So it's no doubt in my mind that a proper diet goes a long way.
Yeah.
But the people growing up in industrialized countries have grown away from that diet. And when they do have overt estrogen dominance and deficiency of progesterone, I think adding real progesterone, which can be synthesized from these plant oils, is a way of treating them. But I grant you that in the long run, if we could get back to proper nutrition, it would probably solve the problem.
I think the public ought to know, too, that when a seed is able to be put into the ground and produce new life, it automatically has natural hormones in it.
Oh, it sounds to me like it does.
All reproduction requires hormones. And I think that's an important thing for them to remember.
Well, you know, people would argue that, well, plant hormones are not the same as human hormones, but my idea is that we have been eating plants and living with plants all this time.
Nature provided
us, and our body tolerates that. What we don't tolerate are all of these synthetic foreign, these new compounds that Mother Nature never saw before.
Yeah.
And I think that people are exposed to this. I was going to say from birth, but it's from before birth. It's during the gestation time.
Yes.
And this is leading to trouble which then shows up a generation later.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to undo. I'm very happy that we have real natural progesterone to give to people to restore some balance where it needs to be done.
Yeah.
But there are many women, I'm sure, even in the United States, don't need this. Fortunately, we now have a way to test for it. We have saliva hormone assay. A person can test for it. When doctors become familiar with this, they can separate out women who have estrogen dominance and those that don't. But just the fact that someone is still having periods doesn't mean she can't be deficient in progesterone. That's the estrogen
and
showing up.
it can be determined.
And it can be
determined.
determined.
I think we have to break again too frequently because it's so interesting.